Your brother deserves it, Dad declared. They handed him the house, the money, the business. A month later, Mom texted, "The mortgage is due." I responded, "Ask your heir." Can you imagine building an empire, pouring your blood, sweat, and soul into it for 15 years, only to have your own family, your parents, tell you to your face that you deserve absolutely nothing? That all of it, the multi-million-dollar business, the family home, the entire legacy, belongs to your spoiled younger brother? That's what happened to me just 3 years ago. And then last month, my phone lit up with 3 words from my mother: "Mortgage is due." The digital glow of that text cut through the quiet hum of my Chicago apartment, an unwelcome beacon from a past I'd worked so hard to outrun. The city was just waking up, but my world was about to be rocked back to its foundations. I was Chloe, 32, a successful business owner in my own right, but those words, "mortgage is due," brought a rush of bitter memories that it was my younger brother, Blake, who got everything. All of it. While I spent 15 years helping build Miller Construction into a powerhouse, Blake was busy partying through his 20s. My father, David, made it crystal clear: "Your brother deserves it." Now, it seems, they're drowning in debt. But let me take you back to the very beginning to understand just how we got here. Growing up in our sprawling colonial home in the suburbs of Boston, I always felt like I was living in Blake's shadow. Our family story began with my grandfather, Arthur Miller, who started Miller Construction from his garage in 1965. With nothing but sheer determination and a beat-up pickup truck, he built it into a respectable local business. When my father, David, took over in the early 90s, he expanded it into a regional powerhouse with contracts all across New England. I was 7 years old when Blake was born. I still remember the way my father's face lit up in the hospital waiting room when the nurse announced, "It's a boy." He declared, finally, a Miller to carry on the family name. As if I, his daughter, hadn't existed for the previous 7 years. That moment, right there, set the tone for the next 25 years of family dynamics. From the very beginning, the difference in how we were treated was subtle at first, but absolutely unmistakable. For Blake's 5th birthday, he got a custom-built playhouse, crafted by Miller Construction's own crew, right there in our backyard. For my 12th birthday that same year, a cake and a bookstore gift card. Just a cake. When I brought home straight A's on my report card, my mother, Sarah, would say, "That's nice, honey," before turning her full attention to Blake, praising him for just barely passing math. My mom wasn't openly biased, no, but she enabled my father's favoritism. She was the peacekeeper, always trying to smooth things over with extra attention when Dad wasn't looking. "Your father just has traditional values," she'd whisper, patting my hand after particularly painful instances of him clearly preferring Blake. "He doesn't mean anything by it." But he did. Oh, he absolutely did. High school, by the time I reached high school, I had a strategy: excellence. If I couldn't win their affection just by being their daughter, maybe achievement would do the trick. I joined every business-related club, became president of the Future Business Leaders of America chapter, and graduated as salutatorian. Meanwhile, Blake barely scraped by with a C average, spending more time chasing girls than extracurriculars. I even overheard Dad talking to Blake after he'd been caught drinking at a school dance. "Boys will be boys," Dad said with a laugh. "Just don't get caught next time." 3 months earlier, I'd been grounded for a week for missing curfew by 15 minutes after a study group. 15 minutes! When it came time for college, I chose business management with a focus on construction. Not because it was my lifelong passion, no. I chose it because I thought it would finally earn my father's respect. I wanted to show him I was serious about the family business. Blake! He bounced between 3 different majors before landing on communications because, as he put it was easy. Internship the summer before my senior year of college, I interned at Miller Construction. I got there early, stayed late, and absorbed everything. Estimating, project management, client relations. Everything. Dad barely acknowledged my existence, assigning me to file paperwork. Meanwhile, Blake, home from his sophomore year, was invited to client meetings and job sites. "Blake needs to learn the business from the ground up," Dad would explain. The irony that my brother was attending executive meetings while I organized the supply closet was completely lost on him. Despite all of that, I truly loved our family business. I saw its potential, its future. Every summer, every holiday break, I worked different positions. I learned the names of every employee, from accounting to the construction crews. I understood their concerns, their processes, their ideas. For Christmas of my senior year, I presented my father with a detailed business plan, expanding Miller Construction into green building practices. I'd spent months researching industry trends, tax incentives, potential new clients. He glanced at the cover, said, "We'll see," and then just set it aside. That same night, he spent 2 hours in the den with Blake, teaching him how to read blueprints, even though Blake showed absolutely no interest or aptitude. Mom tried to comfort me afterward. "Your father just connects better with Blake," she said, patting my hand. "He doesn't know how to relate to a daughter in business." I pointed out that several major construction companies in our area were run by women. She just shrugged and changed the subject. By the time I graduated, I'd accepted I would never be the favorite, but I was determined to prove my worth through results. Actions, I believed, spoke louder than words. Eventually, my contributions would be undeniable. Looking back now, I shake my head at that naivety. No amount of excellence, no amount of hard work can overcome entrenched favoritism, especially when it's reinforced by those archaic, traditional gender expectations. Despite everything, I never gave up. Maybe that was my greatest strength, or maybe it was my biggest weakness. I refused to walk away from a family and a business that I loved, even when every single sign screamed that my place in both would always be secondary to my brother's. I worked 3 part-time jobs throughout college just to pay for my expenses. Blake received a full ride from the bank of Mom and Dad, complete with a luxury apartment and a new car every 2 years. They covered his tuition, his rent, his meal plan, and gave him a monthly allowance that exceeded what many graduates make in their first real jobs. When I asked why they wouldn't help me financially, Dad's response was immediate. "You need to learn the value of hard work." As if Blake didn't. I graduated summa cum laude with a double major in business administration and construction management. Blake barely scraped by with a 2.3 GPA in communications after 5.5 years. At my graduation dinner, Dad raised a toast to Chloe, who always does things by the book. 6 months later, at Blake's graduation, he wept openly. Wept. "To my son," he sobbed, "who will carry the Miller name into the future of our business." The sting of those words, it still lingers. Construction, when I officially joined Miller Construction after graduation, they put me in an entry-level estimating position. Despite all my qualifications, my double major, my summa cum laude, my starting salary was lower than recent hires with less education. "You need to understand every aspect of the business from the ground up," Dad explained. 3 weeks later, Blake was installed in a newly created Vice President of Client Relations role, complete with a corner office and a company car. The hypocrisy was nauseating. During my first year, I identified nearly $400,000 in potential savings. $400,000. I did it by streamlining our material ordering processes. I built a spreadsheet, tracking historical pricing from different suppliers, found patterns, and negotiated better rates. When I presented my findings at a management meeting, Dad just nodded. "Interesting," he said, before moving right on to Blake's presentation about hosting a company golf tournament. The constant disappointment was a dull ache, but I kept excelling. I became known among the project managers as the person who could solve problems. When material shipments were delayed, I found alternatives. When subcontractors failed to show, I had backups ready to call. I built relationships with everyone, from the receptionist to the lead foreman on our biggest projects. One particular project still stands out in my memory. We were building a medical office complex. Tight deadline, substantial penalties if we were late. 2 months into construction, our project manager unexpectedly quit. Blake was supposed to step in, of course, but he was conveniently on a 3-week European vacation with friends. Dad was in a full-blown panic until I volunteered to take over. For 6 straight weeks, I worked 14-hour days. I renegotiated with subcontractors. I reorganized the construction schedule. I personally supervised every critical phase. We completed that building 2 days ahead of schedule and under budget. The client was so impressed, so relieved, they immediately contracted us for their next expansion. At the completion ceremony, I stood in the background, watching Dad and Blake, who'd returned just in time, of course, cut the ribbon. The client CEO, a sharp woman, specifically asked for me. She shook my hand, looked me in the eye, and said, "This wouldn't have happened without you." Dad overheard. He looked momentarily uncomfortable, then quickly clapped Blake on the shoulder and said, "The Miller men know how to deliver." My blood boiled. Living modestly while I was busy saving projects, I was living modestly in a small one-bedroom apartment. Blake, on the other hand, purchased a waterfront condo with his executive compensation package. I brought my lunch from home and drove a beat-up 10-year-old Honda. Blake, he expensed every client lunch and drove a company-leased BMW. I diligently built my savings account, while Blake accumulated credit card debt that my parents periodically and silently paid off. The company, against all odds, continued to grow, largely due to the systems and client relationships I developed. I even created a new division, focusing on sustainable construction, which attracted prestigious clients deeply concerned about environmental impact. These projects carried higher profit margins and truly built our reputation as an innovative firm. And Dad, he took credit for the entire initiative in industry publications, despite having initially dismissed my proposal outright. Blake's contributions, well, they were less tangible. He was the charming face at charity galas and golf tournaments. He'd schmooze the wives of clients at holiday parties. He was photogenic in company marketing materials, I'll give him that. But when he did manage projects, they typically ran over budget and behind schedule, requiring other managers, usually me, to step in and salvage them. During my 5th year, we faced a major crisis. A significant commercial project was on the verge of collapse after Blake approved design changes without calculating the structural implications. The client was threatening legal action, and our entire reputation was at stake. And Blake, he was conveniently sick the week this all came to light. I spent 2 weeks negotiating with architects, engineers, and the client just to find a solution. I secured additional financing, brought in specialized subcontractors, and personally supervised the remediation work. The project was saved, albeit with reduced profit. The dust settled when the dust finally settled. Dad called me into his office. For a fleeting moment, I thought, this is it. This is where he finally sees me. "You've done good work cleaning up the situation," he said. My heart swelled, just a little. Then he continued, "But in the future, consult with me before making financial commitments of this magnitude. Blake made a mistake, but he's learning. We need to support him while he grows into his role." I sat there completely stunned, silent. 10 years. 10 years of dedication, and I was still being treated as subordinate to my brother, the one who couldn't even be bothered to show up when things got difficult. That night, for the very first time, I seriously considered leaving. But I'd invested so much of myself in Miller Construction, walking away felt like admitting defeat. Besides, where would I go? This was a family business. My business, too. Or so I thought. The evening that changed everything began normally enough. Mom, Sarah, invited Blake and me to Sunday dinner, saying Dad had an important announcement. I assumed it was about the new office building we were planning, or maybe the expansion into the commercial real estate market I'd been researching. I arrived 15 minutes early, as usual, bottle of Dad's favorite scotch in hand. The house I grew up in looked the same as always, an immaculately maintained 4-bedroom colonial with a Miller Construction sign proudly displayed near the driveway. 25 years of business success had allowed my parents to add a sunroom, a swimming pool, extensive landscaping. I still thought of it as home. Blake arrived 20 minutes late, offering no apology. Mom fussed over him like he'd returned from war, not a short drive from his condo. Dad beamed with pride when Blake mentioned he'd just put a deposit down on a boat. No one, not a single soul, asked about my recent successful negotiation of a contract that would secure work for the company for the next 3 years. During dinner, Dad cleared his throat and raised his glass. "I've been thinking about the future of Miller Construction," he began. "I'm not getting any younger, and it's time to plan for succession." My heart quickened. This was it. This was the moment I'd been working toward. After 15 years of dedication, Surely Dad recognized my contributions, my unwavering commitment. Your mother and I have decided it's time to start stepping back from day-to-day operations, he continued. We want to travel, enjoy our golden years, and watch the business continue to thrive under new leadership. I sat up straighter, mentally reviewing the transition plan I'd been quietly developing for years. Therefore, Dad said, turning towards Blake. And then the words hit me, shattering everything. We've decided to transfer ownership of Miller Construction to Blake, effective immediately. The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. Additionally, Dad continued, as if he hadn't just obliterated my world, we'll be transferring the house and our investment accounts to Blake as well. He'll need these assets to secure the company's future growth. What about Chloe? Mom asked quietly. That was the first indication that perhaps this hadn't been a unanimous decision. Dad barely glanced my way. We're offering Chloe a generous severance package in recognition of her years with the company, 3 months' salary in her company car. That's it. That's all. I finally found my voice, though it felt distant. 15 years of my life, and I get 3 months' pay, while Blake gets everything. Your brother deserves it, Dad said firmly, his tone indicating the matter was irrevocably settled. He's a Miller man. The company should stay with the family name. I'm a Miller, too, I said, my voice shaking with a rage I hadn't known I possessed. Until you marry, Dad replied, utterly dismissively. Besides, Blake has a vision for the company's future. Blake smirked across the table. Don't worry, sis. I might find a place for you in the new organization, maybe in HR or something. I looked at Mom, desperate for support, for a flicker of recognition in her eyes, but she just stared at her plate. We just want what's best for the company, she murmured. What's best for the company? I stood up, knocking my chair backward with a crash. Blake doesn't know the first thing about running this business. He can't read a balance sheet. He's never completed a project on time. And half the crews refuse to work with him because he doesn't know what he's talking about. That's enough. Dad slammed his hand on the table. This decision is final. The paperwork has already been prepared. Did you ever intend to include me in the company's future? I asked, tears threatening to spill, blurring my vision. Dad's expression softened, just slightly. Chloe, you're smart. You'll land on your feet. But Miller Construction needs a Miller at the helm. It's tradition. A male Miller, you mean? I said, the bitterness a raw taste in my mouth. Don't make this about gender, Blake interjected. It's about who Dad trusts to carry on his legacy. Dad, resolute in his decision, I looked around the table at my family. Dad, resolute in his decision. Mom, unwilling to challenge him. Blake, barely containing his smug triumph. 32 years of trying to prove myself, of loving people who would never value me equally, crashed down around me in that moment. Congratulations on your retirement, I said coldly to my parents. And congratulations on your inheritance, I added, turning to Blake. I hope you all get exactly what you deserve. I walked out without looking back, ignoring my mother's frantic calls to return. In my car, parked under the cold, indifferent streetlights, I finally let the tears come. Not just for the lost inheritance, the money, the business, but for the recognition I'd never receive, for the wasted years trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. It was a grief for a future that would never be. The very next morning, I submitted my resignation, effective immediately. Dad called, not to apologize, not to reason, but to remind me about the non-compete clause in my employment contract. You can't work for any competitor within 100 miles for 2 years, he said, as if that was his primary concern. I wouldn't dream of it, I replied and hung up. I cleared out my office on a Sunday when no one would be there. 15 years of my life, all my work, fit into 2 cardboard boxes. As I took one last look at the company I'd helped build, a company that had crushed my spirit, I made myself a promise. I would never again allow my worth to be determined by someone else's inability to see it. The first month after leaving Miller Construction was the hardest. I rented a furnished apartment in Chicago, as far from Boston as I could reasonably go while still staying in the construction industry. Every morning, I woke up questioning my decision. Every single night, I reminded myself that staying would have slowly, surely, destroyed my soul. I allowed myself 2 weeks to grieve. I cried. I screamed into pillows. I wrote scathing letters to my family that I thankfully never sent. Then I got to work. Rebuilding my life from scratch. My severance package barely covered my first month's rent and security deposit. I dipped into my meager savings to furnish my apartment minimally and set up my new business, Miller Consulting. Keeping my name, even if it was just my maiden name, felt like a small, private act of defiance. I created a website, designed business cards, crafted a LinkedIn profile emphasizing my extensive experience without ever once mentioning it was a family business. Cold calls and networking events became my daily grind. I introduced myself to everyone in the Chicago construction industry, from subcontractors to developers. Most doors remained firmly closed. Construction consulting, from an unknown woman, in a male-dominated industry, it wasn't an easy sell, to say the least. My first client came through pure desperation. Theirs, not mine. A mid-sized developer had fired their project manager mid-construction and needed immediate help. The project was 3 months behind schedule and significantly over budget. I offered to work for a reduced fee, with a bonus structure tied directly to getting the project back on track. For 6 weeks, I worked from 6 a.m. until midnight, every single day. I renegotiated with subcontractors, reorganized the entire construction schedule, and identified costly mistakes in the original plans. By the end, we had cut the delays in half and identified enough savings to offset the previous overruns. The developer was so impressed, so relieved, they referred me to 2 colleagues. Suddenly, I had a small client base and positive references. I had created a niche for myself, the construction consultant you call when things go really wrong. I marketed myself as a problem solver, not just another firm competing directly with established project management giants. 4 months into my new venture, I received a call from Martin Chin, Miller Construction's former head estimator. "I quit," he announced without preamble. "Blake fired Dolores and Jim last week. Said they were too expensive after 30 years with the company. I couldn't stay after that." Martin filled me in on all the changes Blake had implemented. Experienced project managers replaced with his frat brothers. Reliable, long-standing subcontractors dropped for cheaper, shoddy alternatives. The sustainable construction division I'd built, my baby, dismantled because Blake thought it was too complicated. "The place is falling apart," Martin concluded. "Your father's trying to keep his hands off, but he looks physically ill every time he visits the office." I thanked Martin for the information, but I held firm to my boundary. Their business was no longer my concern. Yet, I couldn't help but feel a surge of professional vindication. It wasn't satisfaction, not really. It was confirmation. The skills and knowledge I brought to Miller Construction had been valuable, whether my family ever recognized it or not. As my first year in Chicago progressed, so did my business. I hired 2 assistants and moved into a small, but very professional office space. I developed a reputation for honesty and, more importantly, for results. Unlike my father, who believed in rigid, hierarchical management, I fostered collaborative relationships with my clients. I explained my recommendations clearly, involved them in decisions, rather than just dictating terms. This approach resonated particularly well with female developers and project owners, a growing and often underserved demographic in the industry. By my 15th month in Chicago, I had a waiting list of clients and was seriously considering expanding my team. Meanwhile, updates from former colleagues painted an increasingly dire picture of Miller Construction. Blake had secured several large contracts by drastically underbidding competitors, not realizing the projects would operate at a loss. Quality issues emerged as his inexperienced managers failed to properly supervise subcontractors. 2 major clients had even filed lawsuits over delays and defects. I maintained my professional distance from these problems, but I couldn't help feeling a twinge of sadness. Miller Construction had been my grandfather's legacy. Hundreds of families depended on that company for their livelihoods. Blake's mismanagement wasn't just hurting our family, it was affecting innocent employees who had been loyal for decades. One evening, I received an email from Barbara, my parents' neighbor of 20 years. She wrote that there were rumors about my parents experiencing financial difficulties. Their country club membership had lapsed, their annual vacation canceled. Even the company trucks no longer had the prominent Miller Construction logo, they were just plain white, minimally identified. I nearly called my mother that night, my finger hovering over the dial button. But I stopped myself. They had made their choice. They had entrusted everything to Blake, believing that sharing their DNA and gender somehow made him more worthy than my years of demonstrated competence. Whatever consequences came from that decision, I told myself, were theirs to bear. Instead, I channeled that frustrated energy into growing my own business. I expanded into preventative consulting, helping developers avoid the costly mistakes I'd seen repeatedly in troubled projects. I developed a training program for new project managers based on practical, real-world experience, not just textbook theories. I hired 3 more consultants, all women, all with extensive construction experience, all of whom had faced similar barriers in traditional, male-dominated companies. By the end of my 2nd year in Chicago, Miller Consulting had become a respected name in the Midwest construction industry. I had proven to myself that my success at Miller Construction hadn't been a fluke or the result of nepotism. If anything, I had succeeded there despite the obstacles placed in my path. I bought a small but elegant condo in a historic building, my first real home that was truly unequivocally mine. As I unpacked my belongings, I found an old photo of my grandfather, Arthur Miller, standing proudly in front of his first Miller Construction truck. His expression showed the same pride and determination I now felt. In that quiet moment, I realized I was carrying on his true legacy. Not through a name on a building, but through the values of hard work, integrity, and resilience he had embodied. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Finally, truly at peace with my new path. I had no idea that the next morning would bring my past crashing back into my carefully reconstructed life. Blake's approach to running Miller Construction could best be described as a toddler playing with blocks, gleefully knocking down established structures for the sheer pleasure of destruction, with absolutely no plan for rebuilding. Within the first 6 months of his leadership, he made changes that undid decades of careful business development. His first major decision, firing the company's long-standing, trusted accounting firm. He replaced them with his college roommate's brother, who had just received his CPA license. This new accountant, eager to please and completely inexperienced with construction industry specifics, failed to properly track job costs across multiple projects. By the time tax season arrived, the company's books were in such disarray they had to hire a forensic accountant at tremendous expense. Blake's next brilliant move was restructuring the management team. He eliminated the positions of 3 project managers who had been with the company for over 20 years, claiming they were resistant to fresh ideas. In their place, he hired 4 friends from his fraternity days. None of them had any construction experience. He created new executive titles like Chief Innovation Officer and Director of Brand Experience, complete with 6-figure salaries and company vehicles. The Patterson Construction office, the Miller Construction office, once a model of efficient operation, transformed into something resembling a frat house. Blake installed a ping-pong table and a kegerator in the conference room, claiming it would boost creativity. Monday morning staff meetings were replaced with vision sessions, where Blake would ramble about his grand ideas for company expansion while his newly hired executives nodded enthusiastically. Meanwhile, actual construction projects floundered without proper oversight. The green building division I had established, which accounted for nearly 30% of company revenue, was dismantled because Blake found the certification requirements too complicated. Long-standing clients who had specifically sought out Miller Construction for sustainable building options took their business elsewhere. Blake's approach to winning new business was equally disastrous. He slashed bid prices to undercut competitors without understanding the actual costs involved. Miller Construction began securing contracts that were guaranteed to operate at a loss before the first shovel even hit dirt. When estimators tried to explain the problem, Blake accused them of being negative and not seeing the big picture of growing market share. The company fleet, once maintained on a careful schedule, fell into disrepair as Blake redirected the maintenance budget to lease a new Porsche as his client development vehicle. Equipment began breaking down on job sites, causing delays that triggered penalty clauses in contracts. Subcontractors who had worked with Miller Construction for generations found themselves waiting 90 days for payment instead of the standard 30. Many refused to take on new Miller projects, forcing Blake to hire unknown subcontractors whose work quality was inconsistent at best. By the 9-month mark, the company's cash reserves, built up over decades of careful management, had been completely depleted. Blake began using the company's line of credit to cover regular operating expenses, a cardinal sin in construction management. Interest payments alone were eating up thousands each month. My parents, who had planned to enjoy a comfortable retirement, found themselves increasingly drawn back into the business as problems multiplied. Dad would stop by job sites, wincing at obvious quality issues, but still hesitant to undermine his son's authority. Mom started handling accounts payable again when vendors began calling the house, demanding payment. Still, they made excuses for Blake's performance. "He's still learning," Dad would tell concerned employees. "The market is challenging right now," Mom would explain to friends when they asked why Miller trucks were disappearing from local job sites. The company's reputation, built over 3 generations, eroded rapidly. General contractors who had previously specified Miller for their projects began looking elsewhere. The company's bonding capacity, its ability to secure the performance bonds required for larger projects, was downgraded due to financial instability, severely limiting the size of projects they could even bid on. Lawsuits just 12 months into Blake's leadership, the first lawsuit arrived. A commercial client sued for substantial damages when structural issues emerged in a recently completed office building. The investigation revealed Blake had approved substituting lower-grade materials than those specified in the contract, all to save costs. The company's insurance carrier flat-out denied the claim, citing willful negligence. A second lawsuit followed swiftly when an apartment complex Miller Construction had built developed extensive water damage. The source: improperly installed flashing, a basic construction element any experienced project manager would have verified. The settlement depleted what little remained of the company's cash reserves. Around the 15-month mark, Blake made his most catastrophic decision. Without consulting a single financial advisor, he used the company's remaining borrowing capacity to purchase an adjacent property for a planned headquarters expansion. The timing couldn't have been worse. The commercial real estate market was at its absolute peak, and he paid well above market value. Within 6 months, property values plummeted, leaving the company completely upside down on the loan. And his personal spending, it continued unabated. Blake bought a boat, then a vacation property in Florida. He took business development trips to Las Vegas and the Caribbean, expenses all on the company dime. Company credit cards were maxed out at high-end restaurants and luxury hotels. With the business hemorrhaging cash, Blake then began tapping into my parents' personal finances. First came short-term loans from their retirement accounts, then mortgaging the family home, a home that had been paid off for years. Finally, he liquidated the investment accounts that had been intended to fund their entire retirement. By the 18-month mark, my parents' comfortable retirement had transformed into a full-blown financial nightmare. The company was operating at a significant monthly loss. Their personal savings were depleted. The family home, once a symbol of success, now carried a massive mortgage with payments they simply couldn't afford. Dad, who had planned to spend his days golfing, was back on job sites at 68 years old, desperately trying to salvage troubled projects. Through former colleagues, I heard my father had aged 10 years and 18 months. His confident stride had become a worried shuffle. A worried shuffle. My mother, Sarah, had developed anxiety-related health issues, the stress manifesting physically as high blood pressure and insomnia. Blake, meanwhile, remained in complete denial. He blamed the economy, disloyal employees, and demanding clients for the company's problems. He refused to acknowledge his role in the disaster, continuing to draw his exorbitant executive salary, even as the company fell behind on payroll for regular employees. The final straw came when the bank called the company's line of credit due to multiple covenant violations. With no cash to pay it off and no assets left to pledge, Miller Construction faced imminent bankruptcy. The business my grandfather had started from nothing, that my father had built into a regional powerhouse, and that I had helped modernize for the future, was weeks away from complete collapse. That's when my phone lit up. The text from my mother arrived at 7:13 a.m. on a Tuesday. "Mortgage is due. Can we talk?" My first instinct was to ignore it. After all, I hadn't heard from her in nearly 2 years, except for generic Christmas and birthday texts. But curiosity, and maybe a morbid sense of dread, got the better of me. Mortgage is due. What did that even mean? The family home had been paid off for over a decade. I responded with a single question mark. 3 dots appeared immediately, disappeared, then reappeared. Finally, we had to take out a mortgage to help the company. We can't make this month's payment. I put my phone down and went about my morning routine. Coffee, shower, professional attire. The familiar rhythm helped me process this unexpected intrusion from my past. 3 more texts by the time I reached my office. 3 more texts had arrived. Please, Chloe, we're in trouble. Blake says it's temporary. Your father won't admit it, but we need help. I muted the conversation and focused on my day's appointments. I had a prospective client meeting, 2 project site visits, and a proposal to finalize. My business was thriving precisely because I maintained professional boundaries and focused on solutions, not family drama. My family's financial problems were not my emergency. But as the day progressed, the texts continued. By afternoon, even my father had messaged, "We need to talk. Business matter." Coming from a man who had effectively disowned me from the family business, the irony was almost laughably cruel. After my last meeting, I sat in my office overlooking the Chicago skyline and just contemplated my options. I could continue ignoring them, which, let's be honest, would have been completely justifiable given our history. I could send money to cover the mortgage payment, but that would just enable their dysfunction without addressing the core issues. Or I could engage, but set very clear boundaries. I decided on the third option. Not out of family obligation, not really. More out of professional curiosity. Just how bad had things actually gotten? I called my mother at exactly 5:30 p.m. She answered on the first ring, a gasp of relief. "Chloe, thank God. I've been waiting all day." "I had meetings," I said neutrally, my voice flat. "What's going on with the mortgage?" What followed was a 20-minute monologue of pure financial disaster. The house, their home, had been mortgaged to secure a business loan when the company's credit was downgraded. That loan had been used to cover losses on 3 major projects that Blake had wildly underbid. The monthly payment was $4,300, a substantial sum for a couple whose retirement income had been decimated by Blake's personal business loans from their accounts. "We're 3 months behind, Chloe," Mom admitted. "The bank called yesterday. They're starting foreclosure proceedings next week if we don't catch up." "Where's Blake in all this?" I asked. A pause. A long, uncomfortable pause. "He's trying his best," she said, completely unconvincingly. "The market is challenging right now." "The market is challenging, Mom." I cut her off. "I work in the same industry. The market is booming. Well-run construction companies can't hire fast enough to keep up with demand." Another pause, longer this time. "Your father would like to speak with you," she finally said, passing the phone. Dad's voice had aged, the once authoritative tone now wavering, almost frail. "Chloe, thank you for calling." "I'm listening," I said, neither hostile nor welcoming. "Just listening." He cleared his throat. "The situation at Miller Construction has become complicated. We're facing some temporary cash flow issues that have affected our personal finances." "Define temporary and complicated," I replied, my voice sharper now. What emerged over the next hour was far, far worse than I had imagined. The company was essentially insolvent. Multiple lawsuits from clients and suppliers were pending. The bank had frozen their business accounts. Blake had hired and fired 3 CFOs in 18 months, each one quitting when they realized the true extent of the financial mismanagement. Employees hadn't received paychecks for 3 weeks. Tax liens had been filed for unpaid payroll taxes. "Where is Blake now?" I asked, my blood running cold. "He's in Florida," Dad admitted reluctantly. "At the condo. He says he's meeting with potential investors, but—" He trailed off. "But he's probably on his boat," I finished for him. Dad didn't confirm or deny. Instead, he got straight to the point. "We need your help, Chloe. Financial help." "I'm asking more than that," he corrected himself. "We need you to come back. To help us salvage what's left of the company." I nearly dropped the phone. After everything. After giving Blake everything and me nothing. They wanted me to return and fix his mess? You want me to rescue the company that you told me I didn't deserve to be part of? The bitterness I thought I'd processed, buried deep, bubbled up unexpectedly, raw and potent. I made a mistake, Dad said quietly. We all did, but this isn't just about us anymore. There are 47 families depending on Miller Construction for their livelihoods. People who did nothing wrong except trust our family to lead responsibly. He was playing the guilt card expertly, appealing to the very sense of responsibility he had instilled in me since childhood. And the worst part was, he wasn't wrong. Innocent employees were suffering because of my family's disastrous decisions. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, steeling myself. A hesitation. Come back as CEO. Full authority to make whatever changes are necessary. Blake will step back to a business development role only. And for your ownership stake. Another hesitation. We could offer you 20% of the company. I laughed. Out loud. A short, sharp, incredulous laugh. 20% of a company that's effectively bankrupt? That's your offer. After I built a successful business from scratch, while Blake drove yours into the ground. 30%, Dad countered weakly. This call is over, I said, my voice firm. If you're serious about my help, have your lawyer draw up papers for 51% ownership, transferable to me immediately upon verification of the company's financial position. Otherwise, good luck with the foreclosure. Chloe, be reasonable, Dad started. I am being reasonable, I countered. You're asking me to leave a successful business I built, to rescue one that you explicitly told me I didn't deserve to own. My terms are non-negotiable. I'll talk to your mother, he said finally. Do that. And while you're at it, talk to Blake. Explain that his vacation is over. If I come back, he works under my direction or not at all. After hanging up, I sat in my quiet office, watching the Chicago lights come on as dusk fell. The conversation had left me shaken. Not because of their predicament, but because of my response to it. 2 years ago, I would have immediately rushed to help, regardless of the terms. I would have sacrificed my own interests to save the family business out of a misplaced sense of duty. Now I understood my worth. I had built something valuable on my own terms. If my family wanted to access my skills and experience, they would have to acknowledge that value appropriately. No more giving everything and receiving nothing in return. I had the leverage. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Your father is talking to the lawyer tomorrow. Please help us, Chloe. We have nowhere else to turn. I left it unanswered. Their crisis had simmered for months. It could wait another day while I considered my options carefully. Whatever decision I made would be based on business logic, not emotional manipulation or family obligation. For the first time in our relationship, I had the leverage. The question was, what would I do with it? 3 days after that desperate call from my parents, I boarded a flight to Boston. In my briefcase were 2 documents prepared by my attorney, one for a consulting agreement, the other for a transfer of controlling interest in Miller Construction. I had no idea which would be signed, if either. I rented a car, purposefully, rather than asking my parents to pick me up. I needed to maintain the professional distance this situation absolutely required. The drive to their house, the house I grew up in, felt surreal. The property looked neglected, with overgrown landscaping and peeling paint on the trim. The once proud Miller Construction sign near the driveway was gone. My mother, Sarah, opened the door before I could even knock, pulling me into a tight hug that I didn't return. My father, David, stood awkwardly in the entryway, looking older and smaller than I remembered. Blake was noticeably absent. Where's Blake? I asked, after minimal pleasantries. He's coming, Dad said, checking his watch nervously. He should be here soon. We moved to the living room where financial documents were spread across the coffee table, bank statements, legal notices, tax forms, the cold, hard physical evidence of their financial collapse. Before we begin, I stated, my voice firm, I need to understand exactly what I'm walking into. I want to see everything. Bank statements, credit card bills, loan documents, lawsuits, tax notices. Every single piece of paper. For the next 2 hours, my parents walked me through the disaster. The company had over $3.7 million in debt, with virtually no assets remaining. Suppliers were refusing deliveries, without upfront payment. 3 major clients had terminated contracts due to delays and quality issues. The family home had a staggering $780,000 mortgage, with no payments made in 4 months. "Where did all the money go?" I asked, though I already knew the answer with a sickening certainty. Dad hesitated, but Mom spoke up, her voice small. "Blake made some questionable decisions." As if on cue, the front door opened, and Blake strolled in. He was tanned from his Florida business trip, designer sunglasses perched on his head. He stopped short when he saw me. "Family reunion," he said with forced casualness. "Nobody told me you were coming." "Sit down, Blake," I commanded, my voice like ice. "We're discussing how you destroyed a 3-generation family business in less than 2 years. His face flushed. "That's not fair." "The market conditions. Save it." I interrupted, my patience completely gone. "I've seen the numbers. This has nothing to do with market conditions and everything to do with incompetence and embezzlement." "Embezzlement," he blustered, trying to sound indignant. "That's a serious accusation." Embezzlement, I pulled a document from my briefcase. A spreadsheet I had meticulously prepared, analyzing his personal expenditures charged directly to the company. Country club memberships, first-class flights, the boat, the Florida condo, all purchased with company funds while projects were failing and employees weren't being paid. Blake looked to our father for support, for his usual shield, but Dad just stared at the floor. "I was entitled to compensation as CEO," Blake tried again, a desperate whine. "Not when the company is insolvent," I countered, my voice cutting. "That's textbook fraudulent conveyance, possibly criminal depending on how the funds were documented." The color drained from his face. For perhaps the first time in his life, Blake realized he couldn't charm or bluster his way out of a situation. He was caught. "I've reviewed everything," I said, addressing my parents, completely ignoring Blake now. "There are 2 options on the table. Option 1, I come in as a consultant, charging my standard rates to develop a restructuring plan that you implement. Option 2, I take controlling interest in the company, 51%, and full authority to execute whatever changes I deem necessary." "This is ridiculous," Blake interjected, finding his voice again. "You can't just waltz in and take control of my company." "Your company?" I raised an eyebrow, a cold, sardonic smile touching my lips. "The company you ran into the ground? The company that's weeks away from bankruptcy? That company!" "Chloe is right," Dad said quietly. We all turned to him in surprise. It was the first time I'd ever heard him criticize Blake directly, his golden boy. "We gave you every advantage, Blake. Resources, opportunities, authority, and you squandered all of it." The shock silenced even Blake. "We'll take option 2, Dad continued, his voice heavy with defeat. "Full control to Chloe." Blake started to protest, but Dad held up his hand. "It's done, Blake. If you want any hope of salvaging your reputation or staying out of legal trouble, you'll cooperate fully with whatever Chloe decides." My mother nodded in agreement, tears streaming down her face. I pushed the ownership transfer documents across the table. My parents signed without further discussion. Just like that, I became the majority owner of Miller Construction. "Now what?" Blake asked sullenly, his bravado completely deflated. "Now the real work begins," I replied, looking directly at him. "Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. at the office. Everyone, including you, Blake." The next morning, I arrived at Miller Construction headquarters at 6:30 a.m. The building that had once been a source of family pride looked shabby, neglected. Inside was even worse. Disorganized paperwork, outdated computers, empty desks where longtime employees had once sat. My parents arrived at 6:50. Blake, precisely at 7:20, coffee in hand, offering no apology for his tardiness. I gathered them in the conference room, now thankfully devoid of the ping-pong table, but still bearing scuff marks on the walls. "Here's how this works," I began, my voice clear and unwavering. "This is a rescue operation, not a family reunion. I'll make decisions based on what's best for the company's survival, not anyone's feelings or expectations. Anyone who can't accept that should leave now." No one moved. "Good. First order of business, Blake. You're removed from all operational and financial responsibilities, effective immediately. You'll work exclusively in client relations, under my direct supervision. Your salary is reduced to match other department heads. Company credit cards, canceled. Company car, returned. Florida condo, sold. Blake started to protest, a flicker of his old arrogance, but Dad placed a warning hand on his arm. Blake subsided, glaring at me defeated. Recovery, Mom and Dad, I continued. You'll serve in advisory capacities only. You have institutional knowledge that's valuable, but no decision-making authority. Your retirement benefits are suspended until the company is profitable again. My mother nodded, her eyes glistening. My father looked pained, but didn't object. I've contacted key former employees who were terminated or quit under Blake's leadership, I informed them. 7 have agreed to return, including Martin Chin and Dolores Rodriguez, who will resume their previous roles in estimating and office management. I outlined the rest of my brutal restructuring plan, renegotiating with creditors, meeting personally with dissatisfied clients, implementing strict financial controls, and selling non-essential assets to generate operating capital. I made it clear the recovery would be painful, requiring sacrifices from everyone. Over the next 3 months, I split my time. Chicago, where my assistant managed ongoing Miller consulting projects, and Boston, where I implemented the rescue plan. I worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week. I made difficult decisions, including laying off Blake's frat brothers and terminating expensive office leases. The turnaround wasn't immediate, no, but progress came steadily. We negotiated payment plans with suppliers who, crucially, respected my reputation in the industry. 2 major clients agreed to reinstate contracts with revised timelines after I personally guaranteed quality oversight. The bank restructured loans based on our realistic recovery plan. And Blake, to my surprise, he proved somewhat useful once limited to client relations only. Stripped of financial authority, but still able to charm potential clients, he secured several small but profitable projects that helped stabilize cash flow. He seemed humbled, truly, by the experience of nearly losing everything. Though I remained cautious about his newfound sense of responsibility. 6 months into the rescue operation, Miller Construction was stable. Not thriving. Not yet, but no longer at imminent risk of collapse. I had established systems and training that allowed me to scale back my direct involvement. My parents had downsized to a smaller home, using the proceeds from selling their over-mortgaged property to eliminate personal debt. As for me, I maintained majority ownership, but hired an experienced construction executive to handle day-to-day operations in Boston. I returned to my Chicago business full-time. I had proven what I needed to prove to my family, yes, but more importantly, to myself. The most significant change wasn't in the company's financial statements, but in my family's dynamics. My father, who had once so easily dismissed my contributions, now consulted me on every major decision. My mother, who had enabled years of blatant favoritism, apologized tearfully during a private dinner. Even Blake acknowledged, albeit reluctantly, that the company would have simply vanished without my intervention. But the most important transformation was internal. I no longer needed their approval or recognition to validate my worth. I had built a successful business on my own terms, then rescued the family company on my terms. My sense of value came from within, not from external validation. A year after that desperate text about the mortgage, I received another message from my mother. The company showed a profit this quarter. Thank you for saving our legacy. I smiled at the message, but I didn't immediately reply. Instead, I looked around my Chicago office at the business I had built from nothing, at the team I had assembled based on merit, not nepotism. This was my legacy, not a name on a building or a company passed down through generations, but the profound knowledge that I had created something valuable through my own efforts. Later that evening, I finally replied to my mother. It was never about the legacy. It was about recognizing worth where it exists, not where tradition dictates it should be. I'm glad you finally see that. The journey from being the overlooked daughter to the company's savior taught me lessons no business school could ever provide. It taught me that sometimes, losing absolutely everything is the only way to truly discover your own value. That standing firm in your worth isn't selfish. It's absolutely necessary. And most importantly, that the opinions of others, even your own family, do not define your capabilities or your potential. So, I have to ask, what about you? Have you ever had to fight to prove your worth to people who should have recognized it all along? Have you had to draw harsh boundaries with family to protect your self-respect and your peace? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. You know I'm reading every single one. And if this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life experiences and lessons learned the hard way. Remember, sometimes the people who should support you the most are the very ones who see your value the least until you show them exactly what they stand to lose. Thank you for joining me on this incredibly personal journey, and I'll see you in the next one.